Great. So welcome everyone to episode 10 of the Inclusion Conversation. I can't believe we're already on episode 10. I'm so excited to be introducing our speakers very, very soon. But before that, I just thought I would introduce myself for anyone who doesn't know me yet. So my name is Solène. I'm the founder of Be Beyond Borders and the host of the Inclusion Conversation. And the purpose of the Inclusion Conversation is monthly to bring people together, people like all of you, to break down borders and bring the world closer together, one conversation at a time. And today we're going to be talking about inclusive innovation. That's our topic. And so how is the hour going to work? So the first half hour, roughly, we're going to be talking to our three amazing guest speakers. So we've got Abi, Hardeep, and Michael, and they're going to be sharing their insights regarding inclusive innovation. And then the second half hour, which is always my personal favorite part, we're going to stop the recording, and everyone in this room can ask any questions that they have or even share their own personal story when it comes to the topic of today. So now just moving on to a little bit of housekeeping. I always remind everyone, so we are recording the first half. Cameras on if you're comfortable. We love seeing you, but obviously happy either way. The chat is there, so do tell us. I'm seeing a few comments, so I'm going to be catching up throughout. Do tell us any reactions that you have, any comments, any questions, pop them into the chat. Subtitles, closed captions are enabled, so if you need them, just request them. I've actually enabled them already, so hopefully everyone can see those, but any issues, let me know. Mindset-wise, open mind, and this is a safe space for us to learn. Also want to emphasize that it's a space of kindness. So sometimes these topics can be triggering and sensitive when we talk about diversity and inclusion. So do bear that in mind and really enter this space with openness, with kindness and respect for each other. And finally, there are no breaks for this hour. If you need one, take one. No need to raise your hand or anything like that. But if you have a question, do raise your hand or pop it into the chat. So that's it for the very short introduction. And why am I storming through the introduction is because I really want to hear from our panelists. So we have Abi, Hardeep, and Michael joining us today. And I will stop sharing now the screen so everyone can see our speakers. And so I'd love for all of you to introduce yourselves to start with. So Abi, can you tell us a little bit more about you and what brings you into this virtual room today?
Yeah, thanks, Celine. Thanks so much for having me. It's really exciting to be part of this. It's been great watching the series and all the different topics you've covered. I think it's really important what you're doing, and yeah, quite brave. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. So I work for Innovate UK KTN. I'm in the design team. I was previously in the manufacturing team. So it's my job to help companies, individuals and funders think about how to innovate well. So originally I was really focused on hardware products, so things that needed to be manufactured, but now just across the spectrum, any sort of product or service or process technology. And I think increasingly over the last year especially, this is I've really came to understand in a different way the importance of inclusion as we innovate, of thinking about the people that are going to be using your products and the impact that your product has on them. So yeah, I think as well as things like the practicalities, like the economic impact and the business case for inclusion and the need to open up the talent pool, for example. I'm also interested in things like the cultural challenges, the systemic sort of nature of inclusion and bias, and how we can innovate or design and innovate in a way that helps us prevent and manage unintended consequences. So the stuff that happens when we don't innovate in an inclusive way, how can we avoid that happening? That's what I'm interested in.
Thanks so much, Abi. And you're also highly involved in the Gender and Sex Network at Innovate UK KTN as well. So I learned from you a lot about the lack of gender balance in design in the UK particularly. So good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, can you tell us a bit about you and what brings you here today?
Hi everyone. Thanks, Elaine, for having me as well. Abi can literally cover all the points I need to say about myself because it's kind of like in that space. So, my background is in design and engineering. So I previously worked as a design engineer. Then from there on, I felt the need for inclusion was needed in areas in terms of finding purpose as well for myself. So I set about founding my own company called Tosho and Co, and which was to design more inclusive product that caters to people in different backgrounds, but brings a kind of like a common language for them with the use of the product. So that was my starting point, and the product I came up with was called Pluggo, which got me with the Young Innovators Award. So many things have happened since then, and I guess that's why I'm privileged to be as part of this panel as well. And I've worked with Selin as well with the Young Innovators Award, and so and likewise Abi as well briefly. But my passion is about problem solving. My background has always been problem solving. I've always wanted to fix the world if I can, and how to bring everyone benefiting from that aspect of solution, if that makes sense, and taking away the biases and the stigmas around certain areas of how things are and how the strategies or system is being placed. I like to say I like to break the norm of how things are, and that's kind of like my mentality when I think and design products for people or for the system itself. So that's what I'm passionate about and forward with. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, especially from your car and with everything going on in your life. I really appreciate it. And for anyone who doesn't know Pluggo, so Michael's product that he did as part of the Young Innovators, and Michael, you probably would describe it better than me, but essentially you add it to a plug and it allows you to just like pick up the plug and pull it out much more easily. So it's so much easier for people with arthritis or people with disabilities to unplug different appliances around their house. And to be honest, I think can be used by everyone. And we'll come back to that around how when we design inclusively, it can then be kind of applicable and useful for a much wider audience. Hardeep, what about you?
First of all, can you hear me, Selene?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, brilliant. That's great. Well, hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Selene, I'm here 100% because of you being a change maker and because of you being someone that really cares. And you know, I wanted to be a part of your group because of that. So you are the reason absolutely that I'm here today. My background is financial services. I've spent a good 30 years in sort of the hedge fund world, asset management world, venture capital world and private equity world. And my life changed in 2006 when my son Ishan was born. The last minute severe birthing complication introduced me to the world of disability, both from the perspective of being a parent of a severely disabled child, and also being somebody that went through my own mental health challenges for a good number of years. Fast forward a few years, I managed to work for somebody called James Kahn, who, in case any of you are Dragon's Den's fans, he really taught me a massive amount about entrepreneurship. Fast forward a few years, I met my current business partner who helped me to understand that disability and people with disabilities really struggle to raise investment. So I thought, okay, with my background in sort of investment, my interest in disability, let's set up a company that exclusively invests in disabled people. And that's how Kaleidoscope Investments was born in 2014. So for the last 7-8 years, we've been studying the market of disabled entrepreneurship, making lots of mistakes, losing lots of money, but at the same time building a model that will be very robust, or that is much more robust now than it used to be, that really helps people with disabilities to start their own businesses. And we've met over 1,400 from 65 different types of disabilities. So there's a lot of experience there, and I'm here to share some of those learnings.
Amazing, thank you. And it's so good to have all of you on this panel because there's so much different experiences and perspective that you're going to bring. So I'm very excited to hear a bit more. And we're going to dive straight into, what does inclusive innovation mean to you? And if you can also give us a positive example of an inclusive innovation. And I'll start with one maybe to spark, some thoughts. I was reading an article the other day that talked about, sidewalks, how they kind of dip. And that was initially developed for people in wheelchairs or with different walking disabilities. And now that I know that, every time, seriously, I'm with my suitcase and I come across the dip and I'm like, yeah. And I just, in my head, I just go like, thank you. Like, this is brilliant. And this is useful for everyone. And I think that's what I would love to, hear a bit more. So what does inclusive innovation mean to you? And what is a good example of, when it's done right and how it's helped communities, but also like the world, I suppose. Anyone would like to start?
I'll jump in with one to begin with. So this is one that some of the guys on the call may have already heard about. So it's called Accomable, a business that was set up by two individuals in wheelchairs that were really frustrated that they couldn't find holiday homes, that were accessible for wheelchairs. So what they did is they set up a company called Accomable, and a few years later, they were sold to Airbnb because Airbnb didn't actually have an inclusive mindset when it came to their properties. And now, not only do people, with wheelchairs look for those sorts of venues, but people that are elderly that may have walking impairments, or younger people that want prams that are easy to take into accommodation. So it's become extremely popular. So for me, Selen, that was a really easy, quick example of somebody that did something for disability that actually worked for a wider community as well. And I think the important thing about inclusive innovation in general is just investors or people out there being prepared to listen. And I'm going to say it again, listen, because so many people from diverse backgrounds don't get real opportunities. They say they do, people say they do, but actually they don't. And I think we as a community of investors and people that are going to give grants, whatever it is, we need to be ready to act and listen to people that have got these great ideas from diverse backgrounds.
Amazing, thank you. Abi?
Yeah, I think that's such a good example. I think often when things are really inclusive, they're just well designed and it almost goes unnoticed. I think the examples where it's missing are so much more stark. When it's done well, you don't even notice. Everybody just benefits, and it's kind of the way it should be. But I think, like, thinking about specific examples and huge market opportunities is where people have kind of been suppressed a little bit as well historically. So things like femtech and female sort of health products, people that have gone for investment for that sort of thing and have just been dismissed in the past. So often these products are really, things like breast pumps, for example, are really over medicalized, and kind of like, I guess male investors just don't get the need for something like that, or that can't empathize with the experience of a woman who is using that sort of product. So it's just sort of been dismissed historically. But I think there's like a real surge around femtech and really good design that understands the sort of user experience, and a huge market opportunity there.
Absolutely. You're right.
Yeah.
I think things are changing. Hopefully, we need faster change, but hopefully, definitely changing for the better. Michael?
I don't know if you can hear me, or can
Yes.
you hear me okay? I'm worried that network is fading. But yeah, for me, I think inclusive innovation means caring about the little things that people can easily brush off. I mean, I think, Hardeep and Abi is heavily touch on the summary of inclusive innovation itself, but I think it's just paying close attention to things in regards to what it is
I think
signal.
we're losing you. Yeah, Michael, unfortunately. It's a
Maybe
beautiful
better
sky
for him
behind Michael,
to
though.
maybe better for him to be off camera, Selene, when he's
Yes.
talking, possibly.
Yeah,
of these people plays a part to find part of being. Sorry, can you hear me? Is it breaking up a bit?
We lost you.
Oh no. Is this
For a big chunk of that, and I have a feeling it was really good as well.
Yeah, so I don't know what you said, what you heard, but for me, I said is looking into the things that are easily overlooked is the part that inclusive innovation flourishes, because most of the time the problems we manage is where we actually find the gem in the problems that we need to solve. And I think that's where inclusion comes for me. For me, that's how Plugger was founded, in terms of like finding something that I felt like, oh, I could just manage this. And I was like, no, I have to actually address this problem. It's funny because I was having a conversation, and the point where I realized that most of the designs I've been making has all been around inclusion, finding problems. Problems in the first place is about that. Problems in the first place means there's something wrong. And how do you fix it? You fix it by getting everyone involved in that problem to benefit from it, not just for one side. Because if it's biased to one side, then you might as well just stop. And for example, we look at it into the disability market. There are solutions out there, but there's a stigma on how the solutions come to exist. So it might be too bulky, it might not be aesthetically pleasing. There's so many things around that, which is a stigma on its own. But when you start considering other people who might be able to use that same product, then you're pushing yourself into that inclusive world of, caring beyond just the problem. Now you're thinking, how can other people benefit from this? Even myself or someone else who you don't even think of. And when you become successful with a product is when other people tell you the solutions the problem is actually solving for them, beyond your own imagination or understanding. That's when you know, yes, I'm breaking that barrier when it comes to inclusion with that problem. So that's what inclusion in innovation means for me. And I think it's those little fine little details that you think you can manage or deal with. That's where it starts from. And yeah.
It's interesting. I think you also touched on something there around people. And so to have inclusive innovation, you need a diversity of people in the room, both in terms of like the people developing the product, the service, the solution, as well as the people testing it, the consumers, the audiences. So there needs to be that overall diversity, because too often we come across innovation that is developed in an echo chamber, and that leads to a lot of issues. I was hearing an example that really, really struck me recently. It was a friend of mine, Jyoti, who mentioned it. She's been on the show before. And it was around the hand sanitizer dispensers, and how initially it was made, tested, developed by a room of white people, and tested on consumers, audiences that had white skin. And so when people with other skin colors were trying to get hand sanitizer, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't, because the light reflected in a different way. And you just think, really? In 2022? How? Like, how does that happen? But it happens a lot. And Abi and I were on a panel actually earlier today where we were talking about this, the lack of representation in design, in innovation as a whole. And so I'd love to hear about some other examples from you. And Abi, you've already touched a little bit on femtech, so maybe you have an example in that space, or others. Around when we get it really wrong, like, that show us why, because there are still people that will ask, why do we need diversity and inclusion, and in diversity and inclusion and innovation? So how about some of these examples that really kind of bring it to light? Abi, do you want to get us started?
Oh, I could talk all day on this, honestly.
just a one.
I think the most stark example, people maybe are already familiar with it, but is sort of around the consequences of car accidents for women. So women are like 17% more likely to die in a car accident than a man. And people have known about this for so long, like it's been a recorded statistic, but people didn't understand why, which just blows my mind. But I think it was because there weren't inclusive, there weren't diverse teams developing the product or thinking about the challenge. So you look at crash test dummies, they are modelled on a male anthropometrics. So women in car accidents, their bodies behave completely differently, and that's not been accounted for in the design of cars. And I think I'm pretty sure. I mean, I can't say for sure, but like my conviction is that if there had been women on those teams doing the crash test, designing the cars, that would have been picked up a whole lot earlier. I think the other interesting field just now is healthcare, and I guess everything from clinical trials to clinical settings, and when people go and visit their GP or their doctor, like the experience for women from the drugs they take to the way they're diagnosed is just completely different to the experience for a man. And I think that's something that's people are becoming aware of now and starting to understand the scale of that problem. And I'm really interested to see how that develops, what innovation will come in that sector, because I think it's going to be quite exciting.
That's a really good example, two really good examples, Abby. And on the second one, I think even when you read, beyond the kind of men, women kind of binary vision for people who identify as non-binary or transgender people, the experience with the healthcare system, that's even more challenging. So I think, there's a lot of work to be done in that space to make it truly inclusive. Hardeep, do you have any examples?
Yeah,
Maybe
again,
maybe just one.
I was going to say, a bit like Abby, I could think of loads, but in the interest of time, I'll just say air travel. So for people in wheelchairs that would like to go on holiday, aeroplanes still cannot take powered wheelchairs, or if they do, they invariably damage them. So I think, it's criminal actually that we live in a world where people, that are in wheelchairs that need those wheelchairs are actually still really challenged on air travel. And I know that there are people that are trying to fix this, and we're nearly there, but actually people are still building airplanes without that in mind, right? So for me, that's a huge miss. And, the fact that boards in companies don't have diverse representation, if you don't start at the board level, it's never going to feed down into the wider businesses. So I'll just stop at that point, Selene, but that's the one that I'd like to bring to the table.
Yeah, that's a really, really good one. Maybe Michael, you can solve it for us. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great example there, Hardeep. And I think as well in the automotive industry. So my background is automotive design, and my final year university, my school project, this was like over 10 years ago. And I was kind of like proud because I felt like I was thinking inclusive then, even though the term as we know it now is, it wasn't like that back then as much. So the vehicle I made for my final year project was to allow a wheelchair user to be able to interchange with a fully able person in the vehicle and allow them to drive a normal looking car without having it look like a MPV vehicle, or giving them the comfort and the luxury of life as a fully able person would have as well. And it's a shame that after 10 years the mobility industry is great, they're doing amazing work, but I still feel like there is a stigma around vehicles like that, not feeling comfortable. Oh, it's a disabled person, move away, clear the space, hey, I'm coming over, like make sure you're aware. I feel like the automotive industry can create, the technology is there, the everything they need to make that happen is there really. The innovation is there, but again, for them, it's like that's not where the money comes in. This is, that doesn't make profit us as much. So, it's to prove my concept was real as much. My company, I didn't get the job because of experience. You need to interview as a project designer, so I found it for me. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
I broke down
We
just
lost
the
you a
last
little
bit.
bit.
Yeah, the last bit.
Yeah, so I
Um,
said, can you hear me now?
yeah, we heard
Yeah.
about your example around cars, and then there was something about you interviewing for a job, I think, but
Yeah.
we missed
So
that.
I interviewed for a job, and I showed up my portfolio, which was the inclusive vehicle to take in wheelchair accessible users and also a fully able person at the same space. They told me I didn't get the job. So when like a few years later, I was contracting as a design engineer, went back to the company. I didn't even remember them. They remembered me. They told me about my product, that they've actually made it, but they couldn't make it to get it to work. And that was like a life-changing moment for me, because first of all, it was a moment where I felt like my ideas are valid, for starters. And secondly, it was a moment where I felt like this is actually a product that can work. But me not being there, probably they couldn't figure it out, which I'm proud to say I would like to go back into the idea of bringing inclusive vehicles to, wheelchair users and stuff. But I think the reasoning around it, they saw the reasoning around it within the industry they're in, but what they didn't do much with it. So I think that's an area that I feel like there needs to be more in the automotive industry, because I had like few focus groups back then about how do you feel about the vehicles you drive. Everyone wants to look nice from the vehicles they use to commute from one place to the other, but when you have pretty much a bus bringing you to where you need to go to, sometimes it's like, yeah, I don't want to come out looking like this. I still want to look nice. I still want to look well. So those are the questions and the little things, little rants and complaints that we hear that we feel like we should be tackling. So that's one thing I'm really looking forward to, an inclusive automotive system of vehicles that allows everyone to be able to drive the next Tesla or the whatever car you feel like driving. Your disability should not stop you from driving it. That's what I believe in. So yeah, that's something I wish to see a lot more. If my partner or friend is using a wheelchair, I'm like, oh, come take the wheel. I'm tired. Get into that mode and drive. That's what I want to be able to say. So yeah, that's it. That's one thing I'm looking forward to. I hope we'll get done.
Brilliant. Yeah, that I'd love to drive a car that anyone can drive. That would be amazing. And you could think of different cars as well, like a sports car, and yeah, all sorts. That'd be really exciting. Oh, amazing. Well, some great examples of, when it works well and when it does not. So kind of taking it from there and thinking about, well, what can we do between those two worlds, getting us closer to inclusive innovation and where we actually want to be. So each of you, just to kind of finish on this question, what can we individually and collectively do in terms of maybe something we can start, something stop, and something continue to do to make innovation more inclusive? Hardeep, do you want to get us started? What can we do?
Sure. I mean, I think from a kaleidoscope point of view, I think we would just continue to do what we're doing already, which is, to be honest, raise the profile of disabled entrepreneurs. Obviously, disability is our area of expertise. So we would just continue to do what we're doing, build more role models. It's sad, but we live in a world of role models, right? Everybody wants to see role models. So this Accomable thing I told you about, it's a role model, right? So other people think, well, if they can do it, then we can do it. So I think building more role models, but I think educating the rest of the world to understand that people with disabilities are not necessarily people that you should feel sorry for. They're people that actually can help you to build your businesses, that can help you to think differently, right? It's opportunity creation. So for me, it's like, continuing to get that message across, to get people out there that are being successful into the social media, into the public, to get investors to think, wow, actually, something, I can make money out of a disabled person. And, we don't want them to take advantage of people with disabilities. It's a fine line, but we need to get the private sector involved, because otherwise it's never going to take off in the way that it needs to. So from our perspective, I'm living my purpose every day. I love what I do, right? And that's why we do what we do, to try and change. But I think that societal change comes with case studies and social media. Those are the two things for me that will make a difference, Selene.
Representation and celebration. Love it. Michael.
Yeah, I was gonna say Hardeep is the answer to the problems that we have with inclusion right now. Kaleidoscope, what you're doing is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, you're solving a problem right now. However, from my point of view, I think the reason I found Tasha & Co. as well was to, like I said, find those little things that we overlook and just bring them to life. It could be something so tangent or so tiny. One of the issues I have, like trying to get this product to market, most of the time is it's too niche. It's a niche area, so we can't invest or we can't fund or we can't do this. And I hear that too much. It's almost disheartening to make you feel like, yeah, but people want this. I'll give you, like, you get comments on inboxes and saying how much it's changed my mom's life, or someone's suffering from cancer. And I'm thinking, how has this product solved an issue with cancer? And I find out that they have like impairments after they come out from chemotherapy. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's amazing to hear. So I think for me, it's just, like Adi said as well, about focus groups, having the conversations around it. And I think maybe in the world of social media, encourage people to speak up about the things that sets them apart, or they think sets them apart, and not to be afraid to talk about these things. Then it becomes more, then we become aware, and we see that there is more to what we think it is, if that makes sense. So I think we should learn to speak up and also be allies for people who might be struggling from the point of not being inclusive enough. I think that sets apart a big, you don't have to be a disabled person or someone on a wheelchair to be able to have a solution to help. As far as you're lending a hand or you asking the right questions about what do you think would help you. And again, you have to be wise not to feel like you're taking advantage. You have to know where the lines are. And I think your intent would prevail in everything. Plugger, like I said, the story of Plugger was actually me struggling with pulling up plugs from a socket. Then it just triggered that, grandma has issues with pulling up plugs for a socket, who has arthritis. And I was like, this is better, not just for me, but for grandma, who would, benefit from this more. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, this is something that's meaningful. So, sometimes the solutions we want can start with us, by thinking of other people as well. So I think, yeah, it's for me to just keep developing more products to help people. I've got a list of products that I'm ready to put out there. And again, it's the investment that would help fund these ideas to come out to life as well. So if the more I speak up about it, the more I showcase that this is what I'm about, I'm hoping that would help turn the tables around people who actually have the intent to help and bring about inclusivity in every product and every problem-solving ideas we have out there. So yeah, speak out more.
Yeah. I am picking up things like education, like compassion with and for others. It's really good. Thank you for that. Abi, what about you?
I get the sense from other people's responses that we are asking what should we do about this? Is that
did you drop off for the question? Yeah,
yes.
No problem. Yeah, we're asking like what can we do individually and collectively to make innovation more inclusive?
Yeah, I think that's a massive question. It's a great question. I think the best thing we can do is around allyship. And often these conversations are people who are in the minority take part in these conversations. And it feels a bit like a bottom-up kind of movement, like people recognize the challenge because it's something they've experienced. And we get together, we talk about it, and we kind of drive change slowly, gradually. People start to listen. I think if we want to see real change, it needs to come from the top down. So I think we're on the cusp of some of that stuff happening. So things like in England, they have this new women's health strategy that's looking at some of these issues that have been ignored for generations around women's health. And I think things like that, I think having allies, I think there's lots of evidence, don't ask me to quote it, don't put me on the spot, but there is lots of evidence around the power of allyship and having inclusive people in positions of power in organisations. And on panels like this, if we've got allies on panels, allies that really understand what's going on and can speak about it, so that it's not always coming from a woman or somebody that's non-binary, or somebody that's disabled, you know, that's somebody that's in power, because it tends to be white, cis, able-bodied men that are in power, can talk about this and push this agenda and see the value in it. And I think these guys are out there. I think the more they can shout, I think that's a bit what's going to really make a big difference.
Thank you. That's a real call to action for anyone in the room and beyond this room watching, you know, in terms of allyship, getting involved. And it's really interesting what you said about the top down, bottom up. I kind of think of it as a sandwich. I'm like, we need both. We need, you know, if we all come together, top down and bottom up, surely that's how we can make things really change, because there's so much systemic challenges to address. So, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and we are going to quickly move on to the non-recorded part. But before we do that, I'll just share some parting thoughts with anyone watching the recording. If you're watching the recording, thank you so much. Do join us for the next episode, which is going to be on the 29th of September. And we're going to be talking about life beyond a suicide loss, topic very close to my heart, with a good friend of mine, Mark Pitcher. So do join us, and then you'll get to also be part of the second half, where we get to talk and exchange in the room. You can also follow on Instagram and Facebook at Be Beyond Borders, and subscribe to the newsletter on bebeyondborders.com. And then the final thing is, if anyone wants to watch previous episodes, we've got loads now. There's so much amazing content to watch back, amazing guests that have contributed to this, lots of different topics, including actually Simon, you're here. So one of our speakers is here. So do go and watch Simon's episode. That was episode 4. It's all on YouTube on the Be Beyond Borders channel. So thank you so much to those watching the recording. Everyone else, please stick around and we will carry on this conversation.